Good evening. I'm Leslie Walker of our Public Programs Department here at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and I want to extend to you a warm welcome to the Oprah Winfrey Theater. I also want to welcome our virtual audience who's viewing and joining us from around the world. We are delighted to have you here tonight as we celebrate the upcoming 100th birthday of the legendary James Baldwin. This special event, yes, let's clap it up. This special event will explore Baldwin's profound impact on contemporary literature, theater, and film, as well as his enduring relevance in today's world. We have an exceptional panel of experts here to share their insights. First, we have Suzan-Lori Parks, a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer and musician. Suzan-Lori is a renowned playwright, best known for her play Top Dog, Underdog, and her recent work on the television show Genius, Aretha. Joining her, we have Robert Jones Jr., the New York Times best-selling author of the book The Prophets, which is available for sale upstairs, and the creator of the social justice community Son of Baldwin. Finally, we have Tulani Salahu-Din, who is the museum specialist in language and literature, and she has been instrumental in curating the museum's literature collection, as well as the digital exhibition on James Baldwin. Our conversation will be moderated by the acclaimed writer, activist, and scholar Darnell L, whose memoir, No Ashes in the Fire, have made a significant impact on discussions of Black identity and social justice in the same vein as Baldwin. We encourage you to engage with our panelists during the Q&A by using your note cards, and those viewing from home, please submit your questions and comments in the chat. And lastly, do not forget to explore the museum's collection on James Baldwin through the Searchable Museum platform, which you can use the link that is on your program handout. So with that said, I thank you so much for joining us, and let's dive in this insightful and wonderful conversation. Thank you, enjoy the evening, and I turn it over to Darnell and our panelists.
Wow. Good evening, everybody. How are you doing? Oh my God, look at the beautiful room, y'all. We were in the back like, did people come? But here they are. I am so grateful to be at this auspicious occasion with this illustrious panel. We were in the back just chopping it up and having good conversation, and excited about celebrating Baldwin at 100. Just a quick note about why I said yes to this. One, it's Baldwin. Two, both Baldwin and I were like recuperated church boys. You know, Baldwin, who had the prophetic ire of those types of people who told Jeremiah truths in an incisive way, right? Baldwin, who had lived with a big Black queer capaciousness. And what I mean by that, he was the type of person who loved all Black people and put his life on the line for all Black people, even if all the Black people didn't love him back. But he loved any damn way. And he was an evangelist of love. True to form, preaching, sermonizing about the importance of liberatory humanity, philosopher of human interiority. And he told the truth. You know Baldwin, you know that he would likely say something like, it's precisely because I love America that I can critique her. For Baldwin, to love is to not lie. So as we get into the program, we thought it might be a really good idea for us to do some truth telling. We're having this conversation as Gaza is being ripped apart. We're having a conversation as the name of Sonia Massey is being repeated across the internet and around the world. So much has happened that's unprecedented. Polarization, unprecedented upon unprecedented historical moments that we're living through right now. And we wanted to pause in the spirit of Baldwin to give ourselves a 45-second to 60-second break to breathe before we hop into the business of it all. So whatever you need to do, if you need to close your eyes, if you need to meditate, if you need to ground yourself, to remember that even as we talk, somebody might not even be alive. Okay, I welcome us back to this space. Thank you. So let's jump in. Suzan-Lori. Can we give it up for the Suzan-Lori Parks?
I'm Suzan-Lori.
Come on, SOP. You studied under Baldwin.
Yes, I did. Yes, sir.
Talk a little.
I know.
She studied under Baldwin.
I know.
Talk about that experience. What was it like?
Well, I'm standing backstage doing the math because it occurs to me. I took a creative writing class with Mr. James Baldwin, and that's how I refer to him, Mr. James Baldwin. In a creative writing class of 15 people, including myself, and we were at Hampshire College, which is up in Western Massachusetts. Some people, Hampshire, right? Hampshire had the nerve to invite this beautiful, brilliant, revolutionary, gorgeous spirit, inspiration, to their campus to teach a class in which he invited 3 students from each college in the area to apply. Mount Holyoke, where I was a student, Smith College, Amherst College, University of Massachusetts, and Hampshire College. There were 15 of us in the class. He said it was the first writing class, creative writing class, that he'd ever taught. Now, I suppose that was true. I was like, I can't believe that. But I suppose it was true. He was a brilliant teacher, and backstage, I was doing the math and realizing that because it was 1980, either 83 or 84 when I took the class, I am now the age he was when he taught me. And I was just doing that, like, okay. So he was just a brilliant and gracious teacher, and all the things you spoke about, all the things we know of him, and all the reasons why we love him, he brought to bear in that class, and he was so inspiring, and he loved you so much that he would tell you what he really thought about your writing. You know what I mean? But he would tell you in such a way that you wanted to keep writing. You know what I mean? He didn't have to put you down. You know, he wanted to lift you up, and sometimes that was frightening. You know, and just to shorten it, I can come back to it later in the talk. But he suggested, because I was very animated in my delivery of my stories, short stories we were writing, and I would stand up and read and say things, and then the woman walked down the street, and so I was like that. I was that person. I know. It was a short story writing class, and he said, kind of halfway through the semester, he said, Miss Parks, have you ever thought about writing for the theater? Right, and I was like, oh, shit, right? Oh, gee, because I wasn't a theater kid. I wasn't no kind of theater kid. I was a young woman who was very shy and loved books and loved the library. And I tell you, on the way home, on the 5 college bus, that evening, that afternoon, I started writing my first play. Wow. So there you go.
Wow. That is a beautiful, beautiful memory. Tulani, you are the force behind the Shea Baldwin exhibition that explores James Baldwin's objects, which was the first online exhibition here, right? What did you discover in putting that together? What was most impactful to you, most surprising? What did you learn about Baldwin that you may not have known before?
Oh, my goodness. I've learned so much from being here at the museum and collecting objects associated with Baldwin. I learned about the trajectory of his life from the time he left Harlem in 1948 at the age of 24 years old to his journey to the south of France, well, to Paris first, and then he ultimately settled in the south of France. And just what that journey meant to him in terms of his growth as an African American man and as a human being. He often spoke about the physical and psychological distance that traveling abroad brings about, and that it allows you to develop a perspective on yourself that you can never develop when you're at home. You're lifted out of that immediate environment, and you're forced to confront yourself because now you're in a totally different cultural context. And so that was one thing that really impressed itself upon me. Also, there are so many correspondences in the collection. These are items that I had collected when actually I had begun collecting back in 2010 when I first came to the museum. I came to the museum with the background in the teaching of writing and African American literature at Morgan State University. So when I got here, yay Morgan! And so when I got here, you know, I was able to experience that intersection of disciplines, my writing and literature background, and then in teaching, and then collecting language and literary materials. And so looking at these letters that were from civil rights leaders such as Julian Bond, asking Baldwin to participate in civil rights activities in Mississippi, a letter from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. commending James Baldwin on the publication of Nobody Knows My Name, and thanking Baldwin for the information that he provided in that book that helped King sharpen his own understanding, as King said, on the issue of the African American struggle. So he is thanking Baldwin when we generally think, oh, maybe it should have been the other way around. You know, this is Martin Luther King Jr. And at that time, it had already begun to gain prominence nationally and internationally. So it's the letters, you know, the postcards. This man, he lived a big life. That's another thing that struck me. He lived a huge life. I mean, he spent almost a decade in Turkey. The writer Magdalena Zaborowska wrote a book called James Baldwin's Turkish Decade. You know, he traveled to Africa. He lived in Paris for a time. Then, as I mentioned, he settled and spent the last 16 years of his life in the south of France. And he considered himself, he never wanted to be called an expatriate, because he's called himself a transatlantic commuter. And that, yes, and that is because he traveled frequently from the United States to France often. He came to the United States to engage in civil rights activities, to visit his family, to whom he was very close. He maintained a strong bond with his family. They were 9 children, and he was the oldest. He came to meet with publishers. He came to teach. And he taught at Hampshire, as Susan mentioned. And so he was a transatlantic commuter. And so he attended the March on Washington in 1963, the Voting Rights March, 1965. He testified, this will be my last thing I'll mention before we go to another question. He testified before Congress in 1960, around 1968. There was, before the Education and Cultural Committee in Congress, some legislation to establish a African American monument or museum in Washington, D.C. Wow. As a result of that legislation, it led to increased momentum for future legislation, which ultimately led to the creation in 2003 of legislation that established this museum. So in 1968, he was planting the seed for what we see here today.
Wow. Talking about legacy, right? Oh, Robert. See, I know Robert, you know, this is son of Baldwin, y'all, right? This son of Baldwin is a moniker that you picked, that you've sort of like picked up to sort of navigate your social media presence and your political work, your activism. But how does it reflect your connection to Baldwin's legacy?
Thank you for that question, Darnell. I came to Baldwin rather late. I was a returning student at college, 31 years old in 2002. And in my sociology course, my professor, Jeremy Crace, assigned a reading by someone named James Baldwin called Here Be Dragons. And I read this piece and was astounded by the intelligence and just the magnificence of what he was saying, and felt I have to find out more about this James Baldwin person. I had heard the name, but I had no idea who he was. And I said, I must read everything by him. Went to the library and took out just about every book by Baldwin and discovered, in addition to his genius, that he was Black, queer, a writer who lived in New York City, all the things I was or wanted to be. And also discovered that he had died in 1987, and I felt a tremendous guilt and shame that I had not come across his work while he was still alive. I'm a firm believer in people should receive their flowers while they're here. And so I started looking for where I could find Baldwin, and back then, in 2002, there was not much excitement around Baldwin. I came across this documentary, The Price of the Ticket, PBS documentary. And in it, James Baldwin's younger brother says something toward the end that lit a fire in me. He said, my brother hoped that someone would find him in the wreckage and continue the work. So I said, I felt like that was a clarion call. I mean, I said, I'm gonna start something in which we rediscover Baldwin's work, bring him back out into the public discourse, and think about things in the way he thought about them in terms of solutions. So I started a blog on Blogspot.
What y'all know about Blogspot?
Called Son of Baldwin. And it initially started as me just excerpting his work, saying what would Baldwin think about these processes now. And then it went from Blogspot to Facebook, back when Facebook was only for college students. And that's where it kind of ignited, and people were really interested in learning more about Baldwin, reading his work, discussing his work, arguing about his work, and then, you know, that was the seed. And then what bloomed was, internationally, I can now talk to a transgender woman from South Africa, and she can apply what she's learning about Baldwin to her own life. And then you realize that Baldwin's intelligence is infectious and liberating. And that's basically my connection to Baldwin. And because I did not come across his work until after he had transitioned, I adopted him as my spiritual godfather. So I write in his name.
Wow. Thank you. You write beautifully in his name, by the way. Suzan-Lori, you have an adaptation of Native Son.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Yes, right. The Richard Wright's novel, Native Son. I'll take a leap and say Richard Wright's beautiful novel, Native Son.
And Baldwin's influence then on that adaptation.
Well, Baldwin's influence on me and how I, in my work, do what I feel that he does, in that he leads with love and he says what needs to be said. Those things have gotten me into a lot of trouble over the years. But so in reading, Native Son and rereading Native Son by Richard Wright, and then working in 2018 or 17 when Rashid Johnson came to me, the wonderful visual artist came to me, and he was directing his first film, Rashid was, and said, "Would you like to adapt it?" And I said, "Well, of course, And remembering and rereading what James Baldwin thought of Native Son, and how, let's just say, he had some things to say about it, right? He had some things to say. Richard Wright didn't lead with love. It was Baldwin thought, just to paraphrase it, it was a failed protest novel, that it reduced the main character, Bigger Thomas, to just basic elements, caricatures that were more suitable for white audiences, that there was not a lot, there was hardly any or no love in the novel. This was Baldwin's critique of the novel. When I read the novel, I feel different things. First and foremost, I feel, and I know it was written in 1940, and 1940 was very different from 1960, when you might write an essay about it, and very different from 2018 when you're adapting it. The luxuries that we have now, we didn't have in 1940. And the luxury of perspective, even when you look in the mirror, we didn't have in 1940. And so I led with love when we did the adaptation, and just tried to understand Bigger Thomas as a young man who loved fiercely and wanted the best things for his community, and believed in America so much. And that was the real tragedy. And he wasn't some monster. He was just a person who believed in the dream and then had the dream, maybe like Lorraine Hansberry would say, and Langston Hughes would say, the dream exploded in Bigger's face, and what that was about. So there was a lot of love and compassion in our adaptation.
Thank you. Continuing on.
Can I say
Please,
something
jump, yes.
about that? Baldwin's critique of Native Son ended his friendship with Richard Wright.
You think?
And but it really struck me when Baldwin said he tried to explain why he had written this scathing critique, and he said that it wasn't a slight on Richard Wright at all. After all, Richard Wright was the one who encouraged him to leave Harlem and follow him to France. And he said, "I was trying to learn something about myself through reading and critiquing Native Son." So, we write and we try to learn things about ourselves through writing, but we also try to learn things about ourselves through reading. And that's what Baldwin said. That was all.
I'm sorry, I just have to comment on it because I read that. I would suggest that when we try to learn things about ourselves through critiquing other writers, we are mindful that we are doing it in a public space. And perhaps, because they tried to mend that rift, right, and it was, right. And the fact that, and the fact that Richard was a senior, and had been an encourager, I wonder, especially in these days of, you're doing those hot takes on wherever, right? And I wonder if there are opportunities to be critical of each other, but if we just understand that the whole world is watching, and there are ways to learn about ourselves by critiquing others without burning down someone's, so that's just.
When I tell you, you are tempering my tongue.
I agree.
I'm over here like, don't talk about hot takes, Darnell. Don't talk about social media. Don't do it. Don't do it. This is so good. My goodness, we need a whole other panel to talk about what it means to sort of show up in the world with the practice of critical generosity.
That's beautiful.
And that's not my word. I didn't come up with that. I'm borrowing from scholars who talk about critical generosity. But yes, that was a side. Okay, but practice. Speaking of writing and sort of like utilizing critique and reading strategies, you wrote The Prophets. Do y'all know how beautiful, this beautiful book? So I wonder if you can talk a bit about your approach to storytelling, your approach to sort of how the book emerged and how Baldwin's voice, how Baldwin's poetics may have had a hand in that work.
Before I sat down to write the first words of The Prophets, I reread one Baldwin work in particular, Go Tell It on the Mountain, because I loved the gospel musicality of that novel. I loved the ways in which he could talk about queerness as a unnamed but normal part of existence of a child's life. And I also loved the ways in which he could describe ecstasy, not just from a sexual sense, but from a divine sense. So I read that because I needed a foundation on which I'm going to talk about these two, for lack of a better term, queer, enslaved black men in love on a plantation in 1830s Mississippi in ways that could not be named. And Baldwin showed me how to paint that canvas. He also showed me how precise I have to be about my sentences. Because Baldwin, he could write a sentence of 321 words with not a comma out of place, using a semicolon, a colon, and the tempo of the sentence never lost. The rhythm of the sentence never lost. And each comma brings you closer, so you never lose sight of what he's trying to say. Magnificent. So while I can't touch the hem of his garment, I said, I'm going to try. And so throughout writing The Prophets, I'm thinking about Baldwin, about, as you mentioned before, his deep, unyielding love of black people. So in my head, I'm thinking, I can never reduce these characters to what he says Bigger Thomas is. They always have to be full and dimensional, and the gaze of this book has to be theirs. I'm writing with this audience in mind, primarily black, aware of Mr. Charlie, as Baldwin might call them, but also knocking Mr. Charlie off my shoulder so that I can be free to write in ways that Baldwin did. So I really cannot, I have to give Baldwin so much credit for allowing me, for showing me, for instructing me from another realm, how to be loving on the page, how to be honest on the page, how to be precise on the page, and always keep Black people centered on the page.
I want to stick with this flow, with this sort of writerly flow, and Tulani, ask you if you discover in the archive any hints about, that gave any indication of what Baldwin thought about his writing practices. Amen Corner as an example, like, did you come upon anything that gave you any insight into that?
Well, I will begin with the photographs in the collection because they document Baldwin's interactions with people of diverse cultures, nationally, internationally. And when I think about the writing process, you know, there is what you call pre-writing, drafting, and revising. And for the pre-writing, these photographs really document that phase of discovery when you're figuring out what it is you want to say, what message. And those ideas can be generated by just being a free thinker and being open to people and cultures and traveling the world and making friends. The photographs document his friendships with other writers and other artists, from Nina Simone, you know, to Miles Davis, Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, Nikki Giovanni, Audre Lorde. He had intimate conversations and intimate relationships with many of these individuals. And it really made him, you know, the profound writer, you know, that he came to be. And so also, in addition to photographs that document that kind of pre-writing process where you are free to think and discover what it is you want to say because you're so informed by the worlds that you travel in. He also had manuscripts and letters, and you can see, you know, that second phase of the writing where you are drafting your document, but you are kind of editing too along the way. So you see little marginal comments, or you see red lines, or words struck out and written over. So I could see that he was deeply engaged in that writing process, pre-writing, drafting, and then revising your work. So yeah, the photographs, the manuscripts, and the correspondences.
Also, in the writing class, when we were in writing class, and it was, of course, primarily about the students. You know, he wasn't one of those teachers who would overshare to the point of, you know, hogging up all the attention, not at all. But when he did share, he would speak about how he would, if I remember correctly, he was like a night owl, more of a night owl type of this. I'm getting it right. But he would talk about writing late into the night, only then to wake up and with the feeling that everything he wrote that evening with great confidence was garbage. Which I love, which is because when we might see the footage of him, or we might read his work, and he's on the page, like you said, it's brilliant, it's all beautiful, it's so gorgeous. There was also a lot of just basic writerly uncertainty. It does, and for those of us who write, it doesn't always just flow out like that perfectly. You know, there's a lot of work that is done, and I think he enjoyed that work, and he enjoyed talking about the work it takes to create as a writer. So that's exciting to me.
I want to say, yeah, he did, and he referred. Writing is difficult. You know, once you see the product, it doesn't look like the person went through everything that they did to create it. How many times, you know, you balled up the paper and tossed it in the wastebasket, and then just got up and just said, "I'll revisit this later." And but Baldwin referred to his writing studio in his house as his torture chamber.
There you go. Okay, there you go.
Same, Baldwin, same.
Right.
I do want to invite the audience to contemplate the questions you might have for the panel. We do want to take a few audience questions. And I think that there will be somebody who will come around and collect some of the prompts so we can ask at some point. But a few questions before we turn to audience. And if you're on and joining us virtually, I do believe you can also ask some questions as well. We can't select them all, y'all. So don't get mad if your question paragraph don't get asked, okay? But we have a few more questions for you all before we go. We also want to talk about Baldwin's impact and import in theater and film. Moonlight, Robert. When you think about Moonlight, do you see Moonlight as one example of like Baldwin's legacy blooming, blossoming, flowering in the world?
Yes, particularly when I see how the Mahershala Ali character was so gentle with, I forget the character's name, Sharon, when he was a baby. I immediately went to Go Tell It on the Mountain about how Elisha was so kind with the character that's ostensibly James as a child. And you can see the direct line, like that is, for me, where it actually begins, where you can see both platonic and romantic love between black men, which is so rare to see on the screen or hear on the radio or read in a book. The genesis, in my estimation, is always Baldwin. Even in a film like B-Boy Blues, the way that Raheem and Little Bit walk through the streets of Harlem is very Baldwin-esque. So you see him in obviously in black queer cinema, but you also see him show up in cinema that's perhaps not overtly queer. Like you see it in Daughters of the Dust. I think about, there's a section in Go Tell It on the Mountain when Baldwin goes back in time to kind of tell the story about the parents and the dressing in white and, you know, all of these things that are so churchified. And it makes me think about Daughters of the Dust. So Baldwin's, even the way Baldwin spoke with the mid-Atlantic accent, which used to be taught in schools, and he was a huge fan of film. He loved Betty Davis and Joan Crawford. He was a big fan of Diane Carroll. So you could see in the way Baldwin walks and talks, it was very theatrical. And so even when he's writing, there's something about the way he writes that's very cinematic and so easily transferable. Although, I will also say this, there's so much interior in Baldwin's work that it's hard to translate. So you do lose some things when you see, like, for example, If Beale Street Could Talk. There's some propulsive thing that's not quite there because, you know, that's just the nature of adaptation. But yes, his influence is incredibly present, in my estimation, on Moonlight.
Thank you. Suzan-Lori, talk about the sort of challenges, opportunities, complications when it comes to Baldwin and adaptation. as you understand it or observe it in theater and film?
Well, I haven't. I haven't adapted any of Baldwin's work, but I do see that a lot of, you talk about the interiority, and a lot of times, yeah, a character might spend 3 or 4 pages, or what did you say? The sentence was 321 words, thinking something or witnessing something, and which then has to be turned into a scene with dramatic drive, and I think Baldwin's work adapts very well. If you were to sing it, it would, it would have all those rhythms and sort of movements in a way. You could sing all his essays, I think, or all of his novels. But also you could also sing them live on stage. And I think like Blues for Mr. Charlie or the Amen Corner, 2 of Baldwin's stage plays, were really impactful and very important because people were standing live on stage saying the things at a time when not all theater did that. And just to have a black body standing on stage saying things that were of great importance to the world, not just the black world, but the whole world, to an audience of folks, an audience of black people, white people, an audience of all kinds of people. It was very, very important. But I also want to talk about, we started talking about the work back in the green room. Can we talk about that?
We're on a, I'll watch the time. I'll make sure I have my sister here who told me before we started. She said, I'm going to be very forthright with you when it's time to give you your time. So look at me. So I'm looking at you.
Darnell, can we mention Baldwin's sort of adversarial relationship to Hollywood?
Absolutely.
After he was commissioned to write the biopic for Malcolm X, and they tried so hard to turn it into something that he did not want it to be turned into. And rumor has it that they were thinking about casting Charlton Heston as Malcolm X in blackface. Did y'all know that? That's the rumor. And that's when Baldwin said, I'm done.
You've probably done before. We can all get like really upset about Charlton Heston in blackface, but let's take that off the table for a minute and think of the other reasons why James Baldwin might not have wanted to participate in Hollywood's autobiography of Malcolm X. And let's just embrace, we don't even have to mention them. Let's just think about those things. The ways that we are encouraged to tell our stories that are going to work for the marketplace.
Preach.
Right? That's what I just want. So we don't have to go into it. Let's just say that, okay? We can go back to our regularly scheduled program.
Well, no, this is perfect because my question I was going to have is, how does, it isn't just the mechanics of trying to translate Baldwin's words and literatures into a genre like film.
Right.
It's the complication that comes with trying to take the bigness of Baldwin's oeuvre, the bigness of Baldwin's ideas, the bigness of the ways that Baldwin thinks about blackness, black life, and trying to crush that into a very minuscule imaginary that Hollywood tends to hold on to. That's actually the problem, right? So
yes.
What then does Baldwin's work, or even his ethics, offer us as creatives in the world, in this audience and on this stage, who might have to go about trying to create works in the world, resistant to or not, the realms of industries that has a version of a black life and blackness that they want to see, that may run up against what we want to put on stage or on screen. What do y'all think about that? That question wasn't on the thing, but I just added it.
No, I'm just going to start. The marketability of the truth. How marketable is the truth? How many people really want to hear it? How many people really want to buy it? Right? Right? How many people want to talk about? How many people? Because to make a play costs a lot of money. Okay, to make a movie it costs a lot of money. How many people want to put that much money into that? These are the things. The gatekeepers are not so interested in hearing the truth. So, and the gatekeepers don't all look like Charlton Heston. Just saying that.
Wake it up.
Okay, it's getting very Baldwin spicy in here. Let's start the Q&A. Oh, wow, thank you.
Start Q&A. Look at that. I love it. Love it. This is great.
A question here. Do you think Baldwin would be, this is so perfect. Do you think that Baldwin would be active on social media today? And if so, what would he say? Tulani, I see your lips quivering over there.
I would say yes. You know, Baldwin was the consummate public intellectual. His voice would be heard, and he would use a major medium for getting his message out there, and particularly in these times, he would have a lot to say about what's going on. You know, when I think about the decades that he was here, the message that he was telling still applies today. You know, the whole issue of the truth telling, you know, that it's essential for individuals to examine themselves so that we can, so that the nation can examine itself, because the nation is comprised of individuals. So in a lot of his work, the thrust was this need for introspection, for self-examination, and for us to determine as people what kind of nation we want to be. And so that meant facing the truth of our tortured racial past in order to go forward.
Thank you for that.
He'd have like Substack. He'd have Insta. He'd have a podcast. He'd be like, right?
Yes.
It would be great. It would be great.
Would still be writing.
Another really good question from one of our virtual audience members. As scholars, lovers, and, quote, sons of Baldwin, are you ever critical of Baldwin? And how do you see yourself filling in where Baldwin may have been limited? Can I just name before you call it? I'm thinking specifically about Baldwin's, Audre Lorde reading Baldwin in that interview, I think it was Essence? Yeah. Where she's really asking him to sharpen his politic and his view on patriarchy's role and sexism's role and his sort of race talk. That comes immediately to mind. I always think about the ways that he could have stretched himself more to come to fuller terms around maldominance, talking about maldominance, and also patriarchy. But that's just me.
No, but that's the Baldwin, right? You know, Audre Lorde, James Baldwin. I mean, we have these luxuries. You know, if he were alive today, we could have the conversation with, "Hey, bro, you need to stretch yourself," and you're exactly right. You know, and I think he would welcome that. I think he was always trying to stretch himself. I mean, he taught his first creative writing class, my class, when he was 60. You know, he was learning new things. It was beautiful. So, yeah, we could take him to task. I think he'd respond admirably.
Absolutely, he would respond. That interview that you're talking about with Audre Lorde, yeah, she took him to task, and so did Nikki Giovanni.
Yes.
In that interview that he gave on her talk show called Soul.
Lie to me.
But he walked away saying that I learned from these women, you know, and that's really what he was all about, you know, learning and growing and trying to be the best person, human being, and writer that he could be.
You know, he laid a foundation that had some cracks in it. Our job is not to replicate it; it's to fill in those cracks and build on it. So, like Nikki Giovanni and Audre Lorde took him to task on his sexism, on his misogynoir, and unlike so many of us today on social media and other spaces, he took those critiques to heart. Because if you read his last published work, The Evidence of Things Not Seen, he has a whole section on how he got it wrong about Black women. So not only am I learning from his flaws, I'm learning the courageousness of publicly saying I was wrong, which You know, nowadays you can't say I was wrong or I'm sorry or, you know, accountability is always for somebody else, never for me.
Well said. You know? Right.
Preach.
Good point.
Okay.
What else you got, Ness?
How do you handle James Baldwin's work and objects with so much care? How do you ensure you represent him on the stage and in the museum? So I'll give that to Tulani and you. How do you, and I'm assuming that's how do you represent him with care, right? On the stage and in the museum.
Yeah, you know, there are teams of individuals at this museum that come together to create what you see when you walk out into the galleries, into the exhibitions. And all of our materials, you know, are handled by professional conservators. You know, these are people who, they wear gloves, you know, when they're handling archival materials. There's certain, many methods of moving 3D objects around, things that you just don't even think about, you know. I remember reading just a manual on the care and handling of museum objects. You know, this is a part of my orientation when I first got into museum work. So Baldwin's materials, all the materials just are handled that way. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And then how do you handle Baldwin with care on the stage?
Well, on the stage, I mean, as a writer who writes things, I tell myself and I tell people that the phrase, you know the phrase, you're standing on someone's shoulders. You know, standing on your shoulder. I don't stand. Might we replace that with I walk in your company. I walk in Mr. Baldwin's company, or I endeavor in Mr. Baldwin's company, or anyone else we admire and love. So I endeavor to walk in his company, which means, you know, sometimes you always got to be saying the thing.
And then for a final question, you know, we started off by acknowledging we're having this conversation in the midst of many fires. So much is on fire. That's the truth-telling part. Any good prophet also, I think, adds on to the truth-telling an eye towards the future, a word, if you will, that can give some insight onto how you can get through the fire. If you're all of you who have sort of sat with Baldwin in many ways, what words might you offer to the room and the virtual audience that might be fuel for and inspiration to keep going?
Sorry. Or vote. How about that? That's like, no, I'm part of something. Somebody's got to say it. No one's saying it. Why isn't anyone saying it? Something's happening, people. I mean, something happened in the past week or so. I mean, something happened. Whatever you think about it, it happened. And it's amazing, and we're holding on. We're all holding on. Oh, we can't. We go into November. Oh yeah, okay.
I return to something Baldwin said that shook me to my core and makes me understand. All of the children are ours, wherever they are. Gaza, those are our children too. So, if we think of all of the children as ours, we can't do what we're doing right now. We can't let Trump, you know what he does to children? Come on. Y'all know what to do. Come November, let's talk about it.
Tulani.
When I think about Baldwin, I think about 3 societal values that really frame his life and works. And so I would say, you know, go forth with these values in mind, embrace them, and that is creativity, to be able to create, not just in response to injustices, but just to create as a human impulse that we have as artists, to create. And second is freedom. Get involved in freedom movements. There's a lot of fires, as it has been said, and there are a lot of movements afoot to help put out those fires. So be active and engaged in the freedom movement. And then the issue of identity, which is probably the most fundamental. Examine ourselves, as Baldwin would say. Engage in self-examination. He was very much concerned with human identity, who we are as human beings, regardless of race, history, religion. Being human is the common denominator. And if we can start with that common denominator, we are all human. But he also wrote eloquently about racial identity, of course, and sexual identity. So identity, freedom, and creativity. Explore these values, embrace these values, and move forward with your life.
Can you all please join me in thanking Suzan-Lori Roberts and the Baldwin and Tulani. And also, thank you all for joining us.
This is such a wonderful conversation that does not have to end. I want to thank you all for joining us. This is the first of several opportunities to celebrate the life of James Baldwin. We'll be celebrating it from now until next year, so I invite you back. I also encourage you all again to please check out our searchable museum platform to see all the wonderful digitizations of objects that we have in the museum, but certainly those of James Baldwin. And lastly, if you haven't done so already, please Robert's wonderful book, which is on sale upstairs. So thank you so much for coming out. Have a wonderful evening. Yes. And then we're going to take a picture of the panel, but please hold your seats, and then you'll have opportunities to speak with them.